All right, guys, we're starting the show. What do you? Can't believe you
Oh,
guys.
sorry, I was getting really absorbed in this really great book, so it's kind of annoying that we have to start the show. But
just judging the book by its cover, it's really good.
Yeah, no, that guy's good. We should get him. Yeah, I swear I didn't make them do that. Okay, so that was Jake's idea.
Yeah, believe it or not, that was embarrassingly my idea. That's like viral marketing, you know.
Yeah, this is not a Jimmy Dorblade, the producer thing. This he actually did say that. Let's start off this way. So we could not do a regular episode tonight for various reasons. But I don't want anybody to be sad because they are entirely without GTAA content on their Monday evening. So we thought we would do this kind of short Q&A stream. We're probably going to have Jen at some point in a few minutes. And yeah, see, she's not even there to get mad at that joke. And of course, Jake and Andy are here right now. But I want to just say, let's see. I should say, I think I've teased this before, but I have a article that is up today in the Daily Beast. If my screen share is working, it might not be. Might be. Try to do a screen share right now. Might be overly taxing to my computer.
I could share it, as a producer.
Yeah, no, you could do that.
He was also reading that article while reading the book before the show started. So
that is some impressive multitasking. Yeah, here we go. So that is the article. Christopher Hitchens, hero to the anti-woke, would have hated bans on critical race theory. And it's just about why I think that Hitchens, even at his worst, the kind of politically worst period of his life, I don't think ever would have supported the anti-CRT laws. I think that'd be several bridges too far for reasons we've talked about a little bit on the show, both in terms of his views about racial justice, right? Like some of the laws actually spell out that you can't say that America is is a racist country, and this is a guy who even after the post 9/11 turn did a debate where he's arguing for reparations, and so I think his I think so that's one part of the reason because of his substantive views, but also I think on a kind of deeper level, I think he would have hated it on free speech grounds, which is really how I think that we should be fighting this, right? Since just to I don't know. I don't know what you guys' take is on this, but I guess my just on a really simple-minded level, I think if the sort of main response is what I think way too often it is, which is just kind of calling everybody who supports the laws a racist, then it's not always exactly untrue, but I think it's super unhelpful because it doesn't move the needle with anybody who's not already with you, and it's not going to ring true for a lot of people because if you speak online progressive, then you don't have to be consciously bigoted to be a racist, but that's how most people understand the term, and it's and it makes you seem like. I guess this is the way I'd put it, just crudely. If that's your response, it makes you seem a little bit like a cop. If your response is, why do these guys want to, why are they so afraid of controversial ideas that they won't let us discuss them? That makes them sound like cops. And I maybe naively hope that that most people don't want to be cops, or at least that's what I would like to think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still forming some of my opinions on some of this on some free speech stuff, but I mean, this one isn't hard, obviously, because of your point, which is that we probably oppose both the substance of the law, right, or like like I know. So I know, for example, I mean, I just saw it from a tweet, but Glenn Greenwald was saying that technically liberals pushed so that we don't teach creationism in school. So is that censorship versus this not being censorship, right? Like science, so like pushing what we should teach in schools versus things you're not allowed to say. And then I saw a response to that is like, oh, well, we're not banning talking about creationism. We're just, so they're different things. But yeah, I would say that this one's pretty easy. Like, obviously, we shouldn't be banning really important books, right? So that seems pretty easy. And I agree with you. That's a better tack to take. Why not just be consistent on the free speech stuff rather than just being like fighting them on they want to fight on those terms anyway, right? Like, oh, you're racist for thinking that. So it's probably doing that side a favor. I agree.
Yeah, especially with the whole mouse controversy that's going on in Tennessee right now. Mouse, the amazing graphic novel by Art Spiegelman, it was banned from a school because it doesn't teach both sides or some dumb shit like that. It's the problem is like, yeah, that's a completely horrible argument that they're making. And on the one hand, however, calling them Nazis, I don't think is necessarily going to help the liberals on the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the mouse case, from what I could, I mean, I didn't like stop everything and follow it for 2 days, so I know I haven't really done my homework to have, to be able to weigh in on the fine grained details of whatever everybody's yelling at each other about today. But my impression is like, basically, let's put it like this: like, I don't actually think, like, I think like Corey Robin had a good take on this, and basically I'm simplifying a little bit, like, as a long thread, but like, more or less, it's that, look, were these like people on the school board, right? Like, are they Nazis? Are they Holocaust deniers? No, they're not. They just think that it's like, um, they just don't want anybody to like be made uncomfortable by upsetting, reminders of what happened in the Holocaust, right? That's that, like, because the things they're objected to were like, the book shows people being killed.
Yeah, it's very affecting. I remember when I read it, I didn't read it until college. My freshman, my roommate comes in and he sees me and I'm bawling my eyes out while I'm reading. He's like, "What's wrong, man?" I'm like, "This book is so sad." And then like a week later, I come in and he's bawling his eyes out. I'm like, "Dude, what happened?" He's like, "You're right. This book is sad." So
yeah,
it's an amazing book if you've not read it.
Yeah,
but,
finally people are like, reading a good book. Like well, I don't know. I feel like there were some not as good books that were banned. Like, finally there's one, like, if everyone reads Mouse because of this, like, if
Yeah.
what is it? If the dark web is like everyone has to go read Mouse, like, then that seems like a good thing.
That'd be fantastic.
I just want to pull up this pretty awesome picture in case people missed, of Art Spiegelman looking like a pretty cool guy on CNN. Sneaking a vape hit.
Sneaking a vape mid interview. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I mean, it's been a very long time, but I do remember thinking that Mouse was a good book. But also, like, yeah, it's full of like extremely upsetting things, which is what the school board was objected to, because, like, I don't know. I mean, if you've ever read about the Holocaust, it sucked. It was really bad, it's like, it's very upsetting to read about, like, but of course, that's kind of
I dropped out of Holocaust and film in college. Actually, I was like, I know what I want to do every day at least 7 p.m. after classes is watch Shoah, and I dropped out because it was too disturbing for me. But I agree, it's something that needs to be faced.
Yeah, it needs to be taught. And again, I think this goes to the point, right, that, like, and you mentioned, Jake, I'd had a little run-in with Glenn about this on Twitter a few hours ago, and I guess to be fair, he wasn't exactly defending the laws, but he was arguing that, basically people who think what I think about them are, overstated the case, because like arguments about what goes into curricula, he doesn't see as being in the same category, as like sort of classic free speech things. But yeah, that particular point I found really unconvincing about the analogy with the sort of creationist wars in public schools, because the reason that people didn't want, like we're objecting to, well, first it was like creation science and then it was intelligent design, depending on the point where you come into the story. But, the objection to that stuff is that it's not real science and it shouldn't be taught in a science class. But it seems to me that there's like a pretty clear disanalogy between like a biology class and like, a social studies class or an English class or, things like that, right? That they, like you could talk about actual scientific controversies, of which that's not one, right? In a biology class a little bit, right? Like, and you might find ways to do that where like students might understand some of what you're talking about, but like by and large, right? That's just not going to be like, that's just not very context appropriate. But that's a very like the sort of scientific rigor objection is a very different objection than we want to shield the teenagers' vulnerable young minds from exposure to ideas we don't like. Objection, like those just seem like different things to me.
Well, isn't it run out pretty quickly? Run out isn't the phrase here, but stop making sense pretty quickly because it's a binary. Creationism and evolution, unless there's some kind of compatibilist argument I'm not aware of, are usually mutually exclusive, right? So you kind of have to decide which one you're choosing. We're not saying that every school in the country has to teach mouse. We're just saying they should be allowed to, right? And the point is that you could choose to choose to teach it or not teach it. Like it doesn't really matter. But we're not banning. It just seems pretty naive to think that this isn't a censorious instinct and it's not a free speech issue, like a curricula, in my opinion.
No,
this doesn't
exactly.
pass the smell test to me, but.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, and I think the point is that decision about teaching mouse or not teaching mouse should like really be made by the teacher, right? What like unless you think, unless you have some larger reason that's not about assigning mouse, right? For thinking, that he or she isn't doing, their job well, right? That then like they should be able to, to have within reason, pre head about that. Right? I mean, I trust, like I trust a history teacher, I'm assuming maybe English, to make a decision like that a lot more than I trust some like school board busybody who thinks, who's like, thought about the issue for the first time 5 minutes ago and says, "Oh, that sounds very inappropriate to me," right? Like that's and of course the CRT stuff is a higher level version of that because it's like state legislatures getting involved in what you could say in a classroom. So it's like a couple of levels more absurd than just like the school board like micromanaging, what goes on in a class like that. And yeah, and I think their reason. It's not like they were making some pedagogical decision that's like, oh, this would be, really you should be reading Elie Wiesel instead of, it was just this kind of like, small-minded kind of like, oh, that's you can describe mouse in ways that sound like the warning at the beginning of a movie, that the graphic imagery or whatever. We can't have that, right? I mean, it's stupid. And like I think that and damaging, and I think that the CRT stuff is that on a bigger scale, right? Like, because again, it doesn't even matter, right? Like, I mean, I think look, not that anybody is teaching like actual CRT in high schools. That would be an amazing high school if they were, but like, like if there's like regular, there are things like Derek Bell, is one of the sort of central figures, behind actual academic critical race theory. he did write things you could assign in a high school, and if you did, I'd be totally fine with that. Like, I think some of it would be wrong, right? Like, I would disagree with some of it because I agree with like what people like Adolph and Torrey Reed and Cedric Johnson and like guys like that. Like, I agree with like like I agree with them about some of the sort of like intra-lefty controversies about how to think about this stuff. But like, whatever, right? I mean, like you should, like a good teacher is presenting ideas like that as something for students to discuss and think critically about, and not like you must believe this or else, right? And like, even if they are being a little dogmatic, okay, whatever, right? I mean, I can remember plenty of times where I had a teacher at some point or another who was a little dogmatic about something I thought was dumb. I didn't just start automatically believing it, because my teacher said it, right? And if you are, you have a much bigger problem, than what the curriculum is. And I think one way of really seeing, I think one way of really seeing the point, right? And again, I know nobody's actually, teaching Derek Bell and, like reading the Space Traders in the high school English class or whatever. Like, I think it would actually be awesome if they did, but, they're not. Like, what this was really gets down to is that, like, you can't say anything about, you can't say anything that has anything to do with, like, race or American history or anything like that, that, like, sounds a little too woke. That's what it gets down to. And, some of the things that are banned in those bills are things that's reasonable to ban, but they're already banned by like all kinds of things that are already on the books. Like, that stuff is just kind of there for show, right? But like, some of it's crazy bad because it's like, you're being banned from saying things that, okay, one, are arguably true, and two, like, the thing that really disturbs me about this is that, and this is where it gets down to that kind of censorious instinct that you're talking about, is that, like, if you're a teacher and you're reading this, well, look, some of this stuff, there's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation. Say, okay, how would my school board interpret this if it came down to it? I'm not really sure. And the incentive is just, look, I don't want trouble, right? I'm just not going to touch this whole cluster of subjects. And, I think that's where it gets really disturbing. And it makes, like, so many schools are already like bored as shit anyway, right? And this is just a way of making sure that they stay extremely boring and nobody's discussing anything interesting enough to, to have actual thoughts about. So that's, and yeah, I mean, as far as the creationism thing too, like, again, I think it's a very different context in a biology class as opposed to like humanities kinds of classes. And, but I think, like, look, you could have, I mean, most public high schools don't teach philosophy classes. They would if I had my way, but they don't, right? But like, if they did, right, you could make essentially the same argument that people are making about intelligent design and all of that stuff in a philosophy class. That'd be totally fine, right? You could talk about that there, right? I'd have no objection to that. In fact, any atheist parent who is like, oh my God, they I don't know, whatever the equivalent is of the CRT freak out, it's the, my student, my little Jimmy was exposed to, to William Lane Craig in this philosophy class, like, I would say they were being a cop and, like, whatever, like, little Jimmy could, like, be exposed to a variety of different points of view and he could make up his own mind over the course of his life.
If not to be too callbacky, but if little Jimmy comes home saying, "Oh, I learned today that slavery during the time in the Bible was actually more like a 7-year indentured servitude," then I'm calling my school board. If people don't get that reference, they should watch our last video with about William Lane Craig and Ben Shapiro. But should we get to some chat questions?
We should get to the chat questions for sure.
Yeah, okay. Let's riff for a sec. Okay, no, I feel like this is the first question. It's from Silver Harlow. Well, the real first question is, guys, would you say Ben's book is significant literature? But that is more rhetorical, right? So the next question
that for Jen.
Yeah.
Save that one for Jen. I should say, by the way, the Patreon episode on Saturday is going to be discussion with Matt McManus and Russ Brigley and Ryan Lake about that article from a while ago. We were going to do it in a philosophy segment, but there was too much to say about it, about how Kant is the father of wokeness. So that should be fun. But yes, we'll save that for Jen. What's up next?
Here's my question for the Q&A. At what point is it okay to gatekeep Marxism and say that's not Marxism to a group claiming to be Marxist? Looking at you, Stalin.
Well, I do have some thoughts about this, but you guys have any?
I always kind of find that hard because, the propaganda back in the Stalin time was that it's Marxist-Leninist, kind of a continuation, even though it was kind of a bastardization of what Lenin was doing and yada, yada, yada. But, so I always, I never know what to say for that, for gatekeeping, so I'm not.
Yeah, we're on some of this stuff about the inner workings of different Marxist groups and what Marx said. I'm out of my element. I would just my personal framework right now, I would just say is, and I think Ben, you've talked about this a little bit, but I really don't have much stock in what is Marxist and what isn't Marxist. And I'd probably rather call myself a socialist than a Marxist. And if I would probably rather not spend that much time on definitional games, like what's Marxist and what's not Marxist. I'd probably rather just say, yeah, that group is espousing a type of politics I don't support, or a type of whatever, who knows of what, it could be socialism or it isn't, but it's not what I mean by socialism. Here's what I mean. And then go into that. I don't know if the definitional game really gets us that far. In terms of, is it okay? I guess there's two questions here, right? One is is it strategically good? And B, is it analytically good, right? Okay, it could be either way. I think it's strategically not good. Analytically, I'm not sure. So that's how I'd set it up for you.
It is definitely strategically not good to defend Joseph Stalin. There's no doubt whatsoever about that.
Right, but so do you say to those people, you guys aren't Marxists, or do you just say y'all are defending a murderous?
Yeah. I would, in 99% of context, I would just say Stalin was really bad. I'd focus on that, right? I mean, because the main problem with Stalin is not that is not that he misinterpreted Marxism or whatever, right? I mean, also true, but that's not really the main issue. It's it's a little bit like I don't know. I remember seeing a headline years and years ago. There's new evidence shows that murder may be racist, and it's okay. I mean, it's bad to be a racist, but you sort of got this sentence backwards, right? I mean, it should be the shocking escalation to find out that somebody who's kind of racist is also a murderer. That it's that oh, you got Marx wrong, but you also did dekulakization. That's not. We're kind of burying the lead. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you say about socialism, right? That I think on socialism for sure, right? The exact move that you make is what I always do. It's look, that's not what I mean when I say it, but I'm not going to fight about what we should use it to mean, right? I agree that that's a waste of time. I think the only context in which I would maybe not make that move with Marxism would be if somebody is actually saying, I'll run into this sometimes, oh, you care about all of this, petty bourgeois liberal nonsense about free speech and democracy and stuff. It's very un-Marxist. Then I'd be come on, dude. Marx wrote extensively about all of the above, right? That's you should actually read this stuff if you're going to have opinions about it. So if but even that's not really oh, you're not a Marxist. It's more you're making claims about Marxism, you're making claims that Marxism contradicts things that since Marx clearly thought them, I've lost track of what you mean by Marxism. But I actually really like what Gia Cohen says about this in the introduction to his book. It's the 2000 edition of his book, Karl Marx's Theory of History, where he says that he thinks it's a shame that Engels' term scientific socialism didn't stick, because if that's what we used instead of Marxism, then I think it would cut out a lot of stupid debates about what counts as true, as legitimately Marxist or not, because so often those end up getting down to the question of what Marx thought, which is not like a super interest, like, it's interesting, right? I mean, like obviously, I mean, I think he's like one of the most, brilliant thinkers who's ever lived, but like, so it's definitely interesting to ask what he thought, but like, that just clearly shouldn't be decisive about what you think, right? Because like, it'd be weird to assert that like this guy got 100% of everything right, that like all of philosophy, all of economics, all of, history was just solved in the 1860s sometime, and now we just have to, spread the good word, right? I mean, that seems pretty dumb to me. Whereas if you just said scientific socialism, like meaning like you use whatever you can learn from social science, et cetera, to figure out how capitalism works, how social change happens, how we can achieve socialism, then I think that would cut out a lot of that.
Yeah, and Piketty makes a similar point in like I think like the intro to Capital. I didn't finish that book. Like that's I
Capital
read
is
like
21st century.
Yeah. Like I'm not.
I only read the first 100 pages and said that's enough for me.
Yeah, but I found it compelling then, where he's just like Marx is a great thinker, and there are other great thinkers. I mean, even if you think he is the best thinker of all time, but do you think, I guess, like if people were to call me heretical for saying like, yeah, I really don't really give a shit about being known as a Marxist. In fact, I really wouldn't ever be take one person and add is to them and call myself that, or to me that seems unappealing. Am I missing something though about the value of doing that? Would be my quick follow-up, and I know we should get to other chat, but I'm just curious if I'm missing something there, and you really should do that.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that like I'm very comfortable using the Marxist label, but that's just because like I think it's a convenient shorthand for like a few different things that are communicated by that, saying like, okay, like I have a materialist view about how social change happens, and I think obviously I'm a socialist, and there are like a few different claims that are, I think, usefully bundled into a couple of syllables there, so I'm happy to do it. But like the second anybody's like, oh, but do you believe in the falling rate of profit? I'm like, I don't know, maybe not, right? I mean, like if that's what you mean by Marxist, then no, I'm not. But like that's not really what I'm interested in, right? Like so I mean, I think it can be a convenient shorthand, but that if you're using it, you're using it, but if you're turning it into like a constant litmus test, that's ridiculous. I think you have to argue for it all a la carte.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense to me. All right. While Ben is figuring out some mic situation, let's see. So, okay, cool. So we have a question. It was a little bit based on our earlier discussion. Let's see. Does it seem too pedantic to point out that CRT isn't being taught in schools and doesn't resemble what conservatives are complaining about? I feel like, Ben, you addressed this a little bit during the discussion, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only thing I would maybe add is just like, it's not, I think that I don't think it's too pedantic to point out, right? I think it's fine to point it out. I think if you like make too big a deal of it, you're kind of missing the larger point, because, is there...
What up? What up, my homies?
That wasn't telegraphed.
Whoops. I don't know what that was. It's gone now, though.
Yeah.
Heavy hitters are here. The philosophical heavy hitters, all in one square.
Nice.
Hey, J. Andrew.
But yeah, I would just say, no whiskey for the cat. I would just say that like you're kind of missing the main point, and I think it's kind of a rabbit hole to like get sucked into arguing about that, like, because it's like, oh, how similar is something that somebody might say in a high school class to something that if you like squint just the right way kind of seems like it. And it's like, I think it's fine to just point that out, right? I mean, I always kind of do in passing when I'm talking about this, but I think if you make that the main focus, you're kind of burying the lead.
Could we compromise on just banning eat, pray, love?
Jen?
What?
I know that's a thing that exists, but I have no knowledge of what even that is.
Julia Roberts movie, or turned into the Julia Roberts movie.
I've never seen the movie, but yeah, you can understand that.
It was a book?
That's what
Yeah.
I know about it. I didn't know it was a movie.
Yeah, I knew
Okay,
it was a
let's-
movie. I just didn't, never seen it. I didn't even remember Julia Roberts was in it.
Okay, this is a bit still in the CRT argument, but is it Cameron asks, is it even the books that are being taught or assigned, or is it just their presence? I had teachers in high school who kept books in the classroom for students, but it wasn't assigned. Does anyone like actually read those bills and know like how far they're
I
trying to
think the
go?
focus is. I think the focus of the bills is mostly on what's actually taught. Like in classrooms, like at least the ones I've seen. But
Yeah,
it's certainly true that people do get upset about books that are in libraries. I mean, like that's not like new. Like when I, a million years ago, right? When I was in like middle school, I remember there was like a teacher. No, there's like a parent who was like upset that. Trying to remember actually now if this was even the school library, the public library, but she was very upset that Madonna's book "Sex" was in the library, and it was like a whole thing. So which is
Was it in the children's section?
presumably not.
Because that would upset me.
Sure. That would be misplaced, but like, but I mean, I guess that's just the thing about these people. Like that's always why I want to kind of stress the sort of free speech censoriousness aspect, because it's like every time I hear about the CRT stuff, it just feels like, okay, this is just the 2022 version of if you play Led Zeppelin with records backwards, you hear "Hail Satan."
Yeah. I remember. Actually, no, I was going to say that there was a Texas legislature that he's actually creating a list of books to ban that have CRT in them. And unfortunately, none of the books that I've worked on are on the list, which I really want to see APB, Artists Against Police Brutality, on that list. So Texans, send that, buy copies, send it to your legislature. I want to be
all
on
the passages that are the most objectionable in it. So
just
It's an
pictures
instant.
in it. The guy can deal with it. It's really easy. It's
It's an instant boom to sales, right? If you end up in one of those.
but
books.
please, get that one on the list, because that would be really good for honestly, I don't see any money from that. That actually goes, all the money goes to the Innocent Project. So that's a great reason to get that book banned.
Yeah, but you could totally put that on future, like that could be, that could be in like a dossier in the future, several items on the banned book list.
Yeah. I mean, I was already arrested for the book, so why not?
Yeah.
All right, we have a question. There's a scene in HBO Rome where one of the characters says Greeks talk a whole lot of nonsense. If you have to guess which Greek philosopher you think he was talking about.
I actually remember that scene. I really like that show. So that's Lucius Vorenus is hanging out with Mark Antony. They're at like Cleopatra's palace in Egypt, and it's pretty obvious that Augustus Caesar is winning, and that like Antony's going to die soon. And and so he's having this conversation with Vorenus about whether there's life after death, about paradise or whatever. And Vorenus says, some people say that that there isn't life after death. And Antony says, who says it? Greeks, Greek philosophers. It's like, Greeks, they talk a whole load of nonsense. So I have no idea. I actually don't know any. I actually can't think of any Greek philosophers right off the top of my head. This is bad. I'm sure there are like 6 that people will say in the chat, but like who actually held that position. So I don't know. I mean, certainly like, okay, Plato, no, Aristotle, no, like
Socrates.
Socrates. Yeah, although I do remember Socrates saying that, that the days of our lives, are like dust in the wind. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Socrates in Kansas. All right, let's see. How do we get to a successful program that enhances maximum enfranchisement? That's the bottom line.
All right. I think you should just be automatically registered to vote. I think it should be like having a social security number.
Yeah, like aren't you automatically registered for the draft? Like the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think to be fair with the draft, you have to like actually fill out a form, because I remember I didn't at first, and like I got like a letter in the mail saying that, that I had to, which because I was just like, I was, like I just didn't like it on general principle, ready, even though obviously I knew it's not like they're going to start drafting people, but yeah. So and then I think like. Yeah, I think within like 6 months or something, I got like, it doesn't look like you've registered for the selective service. You need to do that. So then, then the man won. I registered, but yeah, I mean, like there are, again, like, like if you have, man, I don't know. It seems like there's got to be some way that you could just like not even have registration be a thing. Like everybody has a social security number automatically. There's got to be a way to just like show up and like, on the spot, like input that number and, and I don't know that I don't know about the mechanics, but I think that there's got to be a way that we could eliminate having to actually go through this process of registering and have it just be that like everybody is just automatically, if you're a citizen, you're just automatically eligible to vote. I'm also not against like just, I wrote an article for Jacobin about this fall of 2020. I also think that like permanent residence, whatever. I mean, like that's all fine with me, right? Like I think if you live in a place, you should get to decide what happens in that place. That seems pretty basic to me.
No arguments here.
Yeah,
Andy?
I'm co-signing all that.
Okay. So quick, because we don't want to get too much, but just I think so. The aspect of the question that Silver was focusing on was approaching it when you're arguing with someone, and then they say, "Oh, well, Marxism is bad because of Stalin." Should you say, "Well, that's not real Marxism"?
Well, I mean, what I always say is like, I always ask them how consistently they would apply that, right? Like that, like anytime some later political leader, like sort of claims the legacy of some philosopher is long dead, right? Like is it always the fault of that, thinker, right? I mean, like, cause I don't know. I mean, that it just seems like a really weird, principle to have. And I would say that in both directions, right? I mean, like, like Nietzsche had some pretty right-wing political views, but like, I don't think it's reasonable or sane to blame him for the fact that Hitler liked him. And particularly point out that like, not only did Marx not praise any dictators who were alive when he was alive, the only head of state, as far as I know, he ever liked enough to send a friendly telegram to was Abraham Lincoln. Whereas like there are all these other people who we continue to highly esteem who were actually directly involved in really terrible shit that was happening at the time that they were alive. That John Stuart Mill worked for the East India Company. John Locke helped to draw up the Constitution of the South Carolina colony. So that's like both slavery and the dispossession of the Native Americans. That's so I think
canceling John Locke now.
I'm just saying, if people can bracket out those aspects of those people, and all you have to bracket out for Marx is the people who were born after he died, like claimed his legacy while not actually doing any of the stuff he advocated.
Maybe he should have been clearer.
Yeah, everything anybody ever writes about political philosophy, they should append to the end of it that I don't want any mass murder happening. Based on anything I say, if anybody's getting mass murder from this, don't do it.
That's on my dissertation.
That's how
Yes.
Yeah, like if there's any Burgisians like watching this in the future, like I don't know how you're justifying the mass murder you're doing, but it's not from anything we said on the show, right? Logic for the left has nothing to do with that.
And I haven't come across that part in this book yet.
No.
But you didn't explicitly.
I haven't finished it, so maybe somewhere in here.
No, I should in the second edition. We'll put it in the front.
All right, let's see. So question: suppose tomorrow you woke up in a world where every business had been turned into a worker cooperative. What would your main political aims be then?
I don't know. I think I might just stop. Because I could list off a bunch of things, but I think in that world they probably also would have happened. So I hope so anyway. So, I mean, in some ways it's maybe a little bit unknowable, and I could probably come up with something, but I think the honest truth is, if I woke up in that world, I would probably just, I don't know. I think I would probably just spend a lot less of my time worried about politics.
Yeah, well, I assume, like, if anything, as a labor organizer, labor organizing would probably be even more important in a worker cooperative world, right? Like intra fight, like there'd be one side of the cooperative hiring me to canvas for, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that business would be booming even harder, right? So I would just be like, I don't know, have some kind of niche political party within the worker cooperative, right?
Yeah, no, we would all have to come up with new jobs, except Andy. He'd be fine. He would just do album covers and stuff. But,
yeah, I'd be happy doing that.
Wait, what about my job?
Yeah, your job would be fine.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, your job would be fine. And I don't know, maybe I would.
No, I think my job's good actually in the worker cooperative. Well, I wouldn't be doing what I do now, which is trying to get new workers to join the union. But I think like union skills in a worker cooperative world, or I guess maybe they're not hiring staffers.
Yeah,
anymore.
you might have transferable skills, right? Like but it would definitely be a very different job.
Right. I guess literally the whole point of my job would be done. Actually,
you'd be kind of in management though, in a way, like because you're basically like herding cats to get the votes to go the way you want it to, or whatever. Like there's politics involved with it.
I'm already I'm already a bureaucrat. I mean, I'm a staff hack. So, okay, let's see. Well, I'm looking for more questions. Okay, here we go. Question.
How about that one we skipped?
Oh, did we skip one? Which one?
Oh, at the
very first one.
We're going to hold one for Jen.
Oh, I can't scroll all the way up. Does someone remember? So it was. Would you say that their new book is significant? Right.
Yes.
Oh man.
Significant literature.
Yeah. Okay. Ivan Ford. If you could share any piece of knowledge in a high school economics class, what would it be? I'm going to talk really briefly about dialectical materialism in the Civil War tomorrow.
Oh,
Ben,
wow.
you could affect a class as soon as tomorrow.
That sounds like okay, well, this already sounds like an awesome high school economics class. But if I could, I don't know, does it have to be about economics? or we're already talking about stuff that seems to go a little beyond that.
It says any piece of knowledge in a high school economics class. So technically he didn't say it has to be, it's any piece of knowledge, but just know the class is nominally about economics.
Yeah.
I mean, I got lucky because my my economics teacher in high school was like this young guy just out of teaching school buying his first car. So literally, we're learning how auto loans work. In class, like that's what he was teaching because he's learning it himself. And so like we got like our much more grounded view of it. And he actually got in trouble for not teaching like all the history and stuff that goes along with it. So
well, I won't say his name because I don't know if he's still teaching or not, but my college economics professor was a big JFK like conspiracy theorist, and he actually timed the class. I mean, he was conscientious about it. We got through the entire textbook, but he timed it so we'd get through the entire textbook like 2 weeks before the end of class. So we could spend the last 2 weeks talking about JFK assassination.
But so to be fair, is there one piece of economics?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it was like we're doing actual economics in the economics class, I would talk about how, I mean, I don't know. Well, this guy, based on what he said so far, he might have.
I see you people over there. I just want you to know, I see you people.
He might have already, like this guy sounds awesome enough. He might have already done it, but like if he hasn't, I would talk about, all of the studies showing that minimum wage increases don't automatically increase unemployment, and then maybe talk a little bit about how the sort of difference between how the relationship between what you can learn in an economics class and like what your goals should be for something like that is a little bit less obvious than it might seem, right? Like if for the sake of argument, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, like let's say it has a, you know, that like I don't even know, like a million people, 1.5 million people, you know, lose their jobs, but like, you know, 25 million people are lifted out of poverty, right? You know, like should we automatically say that that's a bad thing? And, you know, and I think like you don't have to like tell the students what to think. I mean, I just think that'd be a good prompt for class discussion.
Also, I think Cameron is the winner for Kant puns.
I can't. I'm a little bit up in the comments because I'm looking through the questions. So
Jennifer is acting cantankerous.
Wow. All right.
Wow.
That's next level. Yeah.
That's yeah.
You gotta
All
step
these
up.
high level Kant puns.
You got to step up your game. All right, we have. I could go on about this question for hours. No, I'm kidding. Question about Rawls. His
Rawls, right?
Yeah, his OP has been criticized by socialist and communitarian thinkers for its ahistoricism and inbuilt liberal assumptions, and I wanted to know what you thought.
Yeah. So on the liberal assumptions part, Matt McManus edited this book called Liberalism and Socialism. Possibly those terms are the other way around in the title, but I think it's Liberalism and Socialism. Mortal Enemies or Embittered Kin. I think that's the name of the book. And I have an essay in there. People can check that out. Granted, I'm not necessarily recommending anybody buy it because it's academic publishing and it's not cheap, but you can get your library to get it or something, and you can read it. You can read it there. And basically, what I say is that I think that term liberalism is a little slippery because people mean like really importantly different things by it. So one thing that you can mean by it is like the contemporary political position that's like to the left of conservatism and to the right of social democracy, you know, and that sucks. I'm you know, like I'm with you on that, right? But then like another thing you could mean by it is like classical, you know, philosophical liberalism, like Kant and Mill and all of those guys. And I think that that's, you know, like some of the details of that stuff I would criticize, right? Like different versions of it, but I think there's like a core thing there that's very right, you know, about how, and in a sense, I think it's so right that like in 2022, unless you're like, you know, a neo-Nazi, you know, meeting in a basement somewhere, or like a, I don't know, warlord, you know, leading child soldiers, you know, around, you know, some conflict zone, like everybody else pretty much is a quote unquote liberal in that sense, right? You know, that like you sort of assume that everybody, you know, everybody equally, every single person just by virtue of being a person equally deserves a certain package of, you know, rights. And we all think that, everybody thinks that, right? Like every once in a while you run into somebody who legitimately doesn't think that, and it's incredibly creepy, right? You know, they like most like this, that's absolutely right. And I think that like if you didn't believe that, I don't know what the point would be of socialism in the first place, right? Why you would be a socialist. I think Marx certainly believed that. So as far as Rawls, the original position goes,
hang on, Jacob, you get a thumbs up, and I have to say this group of Kant puns is so much better. Y'all have put some thought into it instead of, oh, I can't anymore. Like we're over that. But this selection has been really impressive.
But the question was about Rawls in the original position. Jen, you want to tell the nice people what that is?
Not really.
Okay.
Missionary.
I'm just petting the cat.
Oh, what I refer to as OP, like I'm thinking like original poster. Okay.
Right.
All right. Yeah. Someone educate this dummy.
The original position is the idea that a just society is one that you would design if you knew everything there was to know that would be relevant, right? You knew everything there was to know about economics and, you know, et cetera, all the empirical stuff that'd be relevant to figuring out how the society should work. You knew it, but you were behind the veil of ignorance on this one key topic of who you were going to be in that society. So you didn't know if you're going to be black or white, male or female, you know, born into a rich family or a poor family. You didn't know if you would have the particular set of skills that it would take to sort of climb the ladder of like a managerial hierarchy or whatever, right? Like none of that stuff. You know, you didn't
This should seem familiar to you, Jay, because I remember making the graphic for this.
I remember Veil of Ignorance,
Yes.
but you know, philosophy section is usually like in you know, hour and a half into the show, so you know, I'm a little fuzzy. But wait, so is it the question? How would you do it based on your own self-interest because you don't know what you're going to be? Because because it should, otherwise it wouldn't matter, right? If you're just
exactly. So it's like one way to think about it, and like, you know, anybody out there is like a Rawls scholar and they want to be nitpicky about this, you know, like just save it. I'm just being approximate here, right? You know, but like is that if you want to test whether the institutions of your society are appropriately taking everybody's interests into account, you should ask, well, look, if I were just trying to maximize my own self-interest, but I didn't know these things about who I would be, would I sign on to this or not? And I think that there's something very right about that. I think that there are criticisms that, you know, like, you know, we could get into, but I mean, I think there's something about that actually nicely captures what the motivation is for like caring about economic inequality in the first place. You know, caring about most people as workers, you know, being disempowered in the way that they are under capitalism in the first place. I think the idea when people say things like that, so ahistorical and liberal assumptions. So the ahistorical is like, this is this sort of way that you could judge like any society that exists at any point in history, and fair enough. But remember the first part, that you're also supposed to know everything there is to know about economics, etc. Right? So it's not like, oh, see, these stupid people, they didn't, you know, like they didn't match this amazing ideal, so they suck, right? You know, it's like that there could be different approximations that you could have at any given point in human history of like how much you could actually achieve this. But the question is, if we're saying like, how much progress is there to be made? I mean, this seems to be a good way of thinking about that. And I think that this idea, the ahistorical liberal thing, I think part of the idea is that sometimes people have this idea that like being a materialist about history means that you should think that like you never ever make any normative arguments about like what should happen, what's right or wrong, good or bad, you know, that you that you just don't bother with that because that's somehow like, you know, idealist or something like that. And I don't think that's right at all. I talk about why not in that video that, you know, if people just go through the channel and scroll down a little bit, you can find it. It's the one I did with the serfs, where we watched that Vosh non-compete thing. And I think that's kind of confused about facts and values, right? Materialism is a theory about facts. It's not a theory about which values you should care about. And I think, you know, also people sometimes say, oh, it's irrelevant because like, if you believe this, then I don't know, everything that ever happens is because of material factors or something like that. But like, if materialism means that you don't believe that anything happens due to voluntary human agency or like what people believe, then that's an incredibly stupid position. Nobody should be a materialist, right? I mean, obviously things happen because of which ideas people believe, et cetera. Sometimes they happen within certain parameters, given what's materially going on in history, you know, the development of the forces of production and, you know, what the economic structure is and all that stuff. That's Marx's point of the 18th Brumaire when he says men make their own history, but not under conditions their own choosing. So yeah, I know people say things like that. I know that's not original to the commenter, but I've always thought that the objection, as popular as it might be, I've always thought I was kind of confused.
Cool. I feel like we can get to the next question for Ben and Jen. Any teaching tips for an intro class? Good practices, least or favorite articles to assign, etc.
We'll make them talk. That's the way that something that I enjoy doing is before each unit, like before we do knowledge and before we do identity and free will and whatever, I have them talk about some thought experiments so they get their own intuitions about the stuff going. And, you know, they're not just like, oh, let's read, you know, they already have thought about it beforehand and in a way that makes it interesting.
Yeah, I think that's good, especially because people like, I think a lot of times that people are reading like philosophical essays for the first time and all they've ever been asked to read in class before, other than maybe like English classes, like textbooks. I think oftentimes they don't I think there's an adjustment about how to read stuff like that, and like what they should even be looking for when they read it. And maybe that's a little bit inevitable, but I think if you've, done what Jen is saying, that probably does help cut down on that a little bit, because they have some context for what they're reading.
And make really good PowerPoints.
Now, I just watched God's Not Dead, and I thought philosophy class, you're supposed to start by making people say God is dead.
Have you ever heard of this movie, Joe?
No.
Yeah.
You have to take the pledge. The pledge is a pledge of allegiance.
It's a movie. It's this like Christian movie about this evil philosophy professor who says he's not going to waste any time in this class arguing about the existence of God, because the one thing philosophy professors hate, it's arguing about stuff. And like getting their students to argue about it, right? And he makes everybody in the class, write down the sentence "God is dead."
Wow,
because that's the one thing all philosophers in history agree on.
Yeah, that's right. And then like one student heroically refuses to do it, and then he has to debate the professor. That's the movie. I've just saved you.
I don't know. I'm trying to access myself from 10 years ago, but like I'm sure I would have been creeped out, but it would have been kind of like dope if that happened in my college classroom. I feel like I would have been like, guys, the coolest thing just happened. Like he was crazy, but that was like I'd be pretty engaged, Yeah,
and then all the mental games he's playing with the student too. Yeah. Like it's just insane.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you couldn't get away with that at the University of Havana, never mind like any college in the United States. Like, so, I don't think, especially because like, I don't know what it was, like 3/4 of college classes are taught by adjuncts now, right? I mean, like,
yeah, well, Jen can maybe answer better than any of us, but that's not the way to tenure. Is to force students to write "God is not dead." Vote for Joe Biden. All right, let's see. From Yoda, can you talk about the relationship between the material and the ideal, and the issue use of propaganda and recruiting for the cause?
Okay, I got a little lost in the second half of it, but I think the first half is kind of about what we were talking about before. So I think just really quickly, right? Like, I think when you talk about materialism as a theory of history, what you're really talking about is the idea that what the level of economic development of a society is, roughly, right? What its capacity is to produce things tells you something about what kind of form of social organization you could have in the first place. That what the economic structure is going to tell you a lot, right? I mean, like to be like, I think if you're going to be accurate, you have to have a couple of caveats here, like not 100%, but it's going to tell you an awful lot about what the laws and form of government is going to be. And that's not going to be like, if you have a theory, and that like if you're thinking about how historical change works, like on a mass scale, obviously individuals could be motivated by all kinds of things. Like we all know this, right? I mean, like, Engels was like, his dad was a factory owner, but like on a mass scale, I think people are going to be more motivated by collective interest than they are. That's going to be a much better bet, right? You're not going to like, if your strategy for social change is like giving Jeff Bezos a moral argument to convince him to turn Amazon into a co-op or something, then good luck with that. But I don't think it's going to work, right? I think appealing to people on the basis of shared interest and the idea that they'll have like a materially better life, right? Given the change that you're advocating, I think is a much better strategy, and I think that's a better thing to focus on than kind of the sort of like particularly debased kind of idealism that's like really dominant in a lot of American liberal politics now, where you spend most of your time, yelling at people about the ideas that are in their heads.
Right.
So that's roughly how I would see that. Again, notice I didn't say anything about like nothing happens because the ideas that people have. I didn't say, like there's, whatever happens is inevitable, like none of that, right? But I think roughly all the stuff I just said is what is meant by materialism, and then idealism is when you think that like cultural, like purely sort of cultural and ideological explanations, like kind of do work at explaining things that they're just not going to really do.
And strategically, I guess also, isn't it just easier to figure out like people's interest based on their material? Like it's much harder to poll everyone in terms of what they believe, but at least we know some basic facts, like by the constraints on them based on their material condition in life. Like in terms of strategically trying to figure out politics, isn't that just like a more empirical way to start? Or like, is that a consideration as well? All right, cool. Let's see. Ben, has anything positive come out of postmodernism, or is it all just malarkey?
Yeah, it's kind of all malarkey.
What about books? What about like some of the best novels of all time? I assume that's not what he's talking about, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think he's talking about postmodernism, like philosophy, and people can watch that debate I did about that a little while ago, see what I think about that. As far as like, I don't know, people talk about like Infinite Jest as like postmodern literature or whatever. It's like, I don't know. I like Infinite Jest. I don't know. It's a really good book. I don't know. And know, and don't let anybody tell you that like, oh, it's so, it's not pretentious. It's not, it's not a drag to read. It's actually like a really quick read. It's just, there's a lot of it.
Yeah, it's different than like reading Pynchon, which is like actually really, really challenging, but also rewarding. Yeah, I think so.
I would rather read Infinite Jest.
Yeah, it's more fun.
Good. I co-sign on everything he said.
Right, but it could make sense though, right? That postmodernism was better for like aesthetics than it was for like the search for truth, right? Or like at least based on your critiques of it, because from an aesthetic point of view, it doesn't really matter so much. Yeah, some great aesthetics came out of it.
Last Action Hero, American Psycho,
all postmodern.
I don't know. I mean, I hear people applying those word sets sometimes. I sort of lose track a little bit of what it means, but I did like American Psycho.
And by the way, folks, I'm trying to like make sure that everyone gets a chance. So if you asked multiple questions and I ignored it, I apologize, but like keep them in store for the next Q&A. Question was Sartre just a posh tanky?
No.
Okay.
Moving on.
Expanding just a little bit. Read what he wrote about the Hungarian Revolution. I think it's complicated because he did say things in certain contexts. He did have views that are kind of tanky-ish. But I also think if you read what he wrote about the Hungarian Revolution, or you read his book Search for a Method, I think like he also had some like very anti-Stalinist impulses sometimes. Also, while we're talking about novels, Simone Beauvoir's novel, The Mandarins, I think it's called, is, I remember that book has an argument in it between some of the characters that is like probably the best sort of case for like having certain kinds of tanky-ish views that I've ever read. I wasn't, I'm not convinced, right? But I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I might even be remembering the name of the novel wrong. So I don't know. Don't trust me on this, but I think I remembered that correctly. And if so, it's worth checking out.
And you should definitely go back for the last 1,300 pages of Infinite Jest.
Yes.
A lot of great stuff about tennis in that book. It's the number one reason to read Infinite Jest. Is all about tennis. All right, let's see. Question for Ben and Jen: Team Kant or Team Mills?
Kant.
That's good for me.
Yeah,
works for me.
I'm against looking at Mills, so
it's technically not for us, but I thought we'd weigh in. But I'll let you tell me how long we want to do this. But let's see. Bruh Machine. I like that. It's a good name. If a society existed with enough worker cooperatives to ensure that any worker wishing to work in one could, and wealth inequality was minimal, what's incentive for making all businesses cooperative?
Yeah, probably not literally all, because like if you like if you're basically like, it's a little bit complicated, because like if you are basically self-employed, but like you hire somebody to like to do a little bit of website design work for you or whatever, like I wouldn't say like, oh, you have to like, you know, have the structure in which that person, you know, like has, you know, equal say in the thing or whatever. That's kind of ridiculous, right? You know, but I think that like, you know, full-time, right, people who are full-time employees over a certain threshold maybe of, you know, like of size, then I think you have a much better case for that. I also think, I don't know, I actually think people spend a lot of time on this question in ways that like I'm not always quite sure why, right? You know, because it's like sort of so distant, you know, and like it's like, I don't know. I mean, like if I imagine a world where it's 90%, sounds amazing to me. And if you believe that it would stably be 90%, then yeah, there's no reason to restrict that, because like the main objection to the way normal capitalist businesses work is that people don't have a real choice, right? That there's no way, you know, that you have to submit yourself to this kind of authority structure without democratic accountability, because otherwise you're just going to be unemployed. And in a world where, you know, 90% of business were co-ops, that wouldn't be true. So I wouldn't really care, right? You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, if you want to, you know, if like you don't, if, you know, you just don't care, you know, then fine, go for it, whatever, right? You know, but like, but whether it would be or not, right? Whether you maybe need to have certain legal restrictions on it, I don't know. I mean, like, I think that's an empirical question. We'd find out, and I'm not too committed to an answer to that question one way or the other. I mean, I think structurally, it's like saying, like, if you know, would you need minimum wage laws if like 95% of businesses pay really, really well? And it's like, I don't know, maybe not, right? You know, like, but like, it's also distant enough from the world that we're living in that it's not something that I stay up at night thinking about.
Yeah, makes sense to me. All right, how many more questions do you think we have time for, Ben?
We can do a few more. I don't know. What do we got in the pile
Okay.
here?
Okay, let's see. Well, I think this is a joke, but while I'm searching for another question. Why didn't Don Knotts ever play Sartre in a hilarious biopic while he had the chance? Why not?
Nobody had the script.
Yeah, there was also a question, I should say, on Twitter while we're talking about movies about the classic blunders. But the only ones I really remember were starting a land war in Asia and going up against a Sicilian when death is on the line. I think there was another one that was mentioned, but I don't remember what it is.
Oh man, I just watched it too. What was it? I don't know, but we've been talking about the classic blunders on Movie Night Extravaganza a lot.
So I saw 255 say that if they didn't have another question, they were going to go heat some chicken. But I think we have time for one of their questions because we went through most of them. So they can go back, they can watch the end and see a little treat that we answered another one. Question: suppose we lived in like a culture Trek like socialist world where all our personal needs and wants are taken care of. What, if any, political disputes would there be? Well, you just watch Star Trek. It'd be between the Borg and the Klingon. No, what?
I mean, there's also those little like weird aliens that like burrowed into the Admiralty in the first season.
And then you have Section 9, right? Or what is it? Section Section 31, where they have
I've got to admit, I only ever really watched the original series, so.
We're
going in deep lore here. Then
there's no Section 31, but basically they're like the CIA or FBI, like they do these like covert operations to they curb civil liberties. Anyway, I feel like the point isn't about Star Trek. The point is about post scarcity.
I have nothing to offer here. I would like to tell Jacob that no, it is not normal to make a big pot of mayonnaise in the morning. And on that note, I think I'm gonna peace out, go wash some dishes.
Yeah, the Star Trek question, I think.
It's just a little too close to home.
I'll see y'all next week.
I'm scaring the gens
Team
away.
Snoopy forever.
Team Snoopy forever. Our Star Trek talk is scaring the gens
Yeah,
away.
well, this is
I
the
mean,
first time.
I watched the Next Generation movies, or most of them. I think I stopped at some point, but I never actually watched the show. I've seen like 3 episodes of it.
But so the point is post scarcity. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think post scarcity. Well, yeah. So first of all, I think like in a socialist world, I think they're like even one where there's some sense in which like people's material needs are more or less met. I think there'd still be tons of political divisions and disagreements about exactly how to allocate resources. Like Lee Phillips gave the example when I was talking to him about this a while back about, in fact, it was on the Star Trek subject. Like you could imagine people having really intense political debates in this, socialist world about whether to spend resources exploring other planets, that could be spent at home. But I think in a post-scarcity world, I think an obvious oh man, and Jen's gone for that one. I think in a post-scarcity world, I think an obvious case for a political debate that would still be like super heated would be about how to handle drug abuse. Because if you don't believe that there would still be drug abuse in that world, you haven't thought about it enough. Look, is like the opioid epidemic fueled by economic misery? Absolutely it is. But also there are lots of rich people with drug problems.
I think that's partly what that British guy who wrote the book on addiction, where he has the example of Rat City. Was it Johan Hari? Is that right?
I don't know the guy's name, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Basically, there's an experiment where, like, if rats are being socialized properly, they have access to drugs. They don't do the drugs, but if the rats are alienated, they do the drugs, and that's basically what the result of the study is. And saying kind of playing that forward, like part of the reason why there is drug abuse is alienation in society.
Yeah, no, and I think that's true, but I also question how much, like, depending on what you mean, right? Like, I also question whether there are certain things that we would call alienation that are realistically not going to exist in any kind of, like, complex technological society, like, I'm a little skeptical about that. I think,
and do rats have, like, addiction problems, too? Like like addictive personality disorder or whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I also think like people are unhappy for lots of reasons
I think as long as my hot take is that as long as we're finite beings that can contemplate the infinite, right? There's going to be people who have existential crises and are depressed and take drugs to deal with it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's my hot take.
So I think like conflicts between I think that's clearly a correct take. And I think the conflicts between people who have more of a sort of like libertarian or more of a kind of paternalistic attitude towards how to handle drug addicts, I think that would still be like a hot issue in a world where everybody's material needs were met. Like that's for sure. I actually also think some of the free speech stuff in a weird way might be, although I think it would play out in a really different way, but that's kind of a half-formed thought. I mean, because part of the problem is I also don't know, and I think we probably can't know from 2022, like which issues people would be like angry about each other enough about that they would like want to like stop the other side.
Well, like in Star Trek, for example, and I promise I'm not getting into lore, but I'm saying I mean they haven't cured old age, but they've cured like most diseases, right? But what about the people who are like, oh, I don't want to be, don't wave that thing in front of me and cure my cancer, that's still like the vaccine mandate type stuff, or medical stuff.
Oh
like,
yeah, no,
like the paternalistic state. Are we gonna cure people of these? Are we gonna let people just die?
Right? Like bones not wanting to be transported on the transporter.
Yeah, I thought of that and got scared about referencing more actual Star Trek, and to see the viewers plummet or spike. Okay, so we have a question from Joe. Maybe time for like a couple more, right?
Yeah.
Question: how do you like to respond to right-wing arguments about the debt and MMT or no MMT? Sneaky nesting a second question in there, but I'll allow it.
Yeah. I think so. I saw somebody say in the chat earlier they were surprised about my comment about the falling rate of profit, and like in some ways, even though it's a very different economic theory, in some ways, like my attitude towards that is a lot like my attitude towards the MMT stuff, which is just to say, I think I'm just super wary of people believing, like getting super committed to like a descriptive model about how economies actually work because they think it fits their normative preferences, which I think everybody kind of does, right? Like somehow, like every libertarian either believes that, like, I don't know, Chicago School or Austrian economics is correct, right? And if you're a, and if you want to be a revolutionary Marxist, you convince yourself of the, value is just, abstract socially necessary labor time, and that this will tell you exactly how to predict future economic crises. And if you're kind of a social, like maximalist social democrat, you end up believing in MMT. And I think some of these models can sort of latch on to real things about how economies work, but I also think because there are multiple models that can like be based on assumptions that sound somewhat plausible, that can latch onto some aspects of a really messy reality, I think you need to kind of be on guard for like just sort of falling into convincing yourself that the one that you think fits your political preferences is right. And I kind of feel like a lot of MMT people feel uncomfortably close to me to being like a left-wing version of the libertarian, I guess you don't understand economics, guy, right? That like it can, at its worst, right? And I know that there's a range, right? But at its worst, I think it could fall into that. As far as the deck, but also I think that part of the okay. So we'll definitely answer the super chat in a second, but I think part of the so that's like the sort of like view from 10,000 feet kind of answer. I think a little bit more concretely, I'm a little wary of people who think that like sort of using MMT concepts as this wonderful cheat code for like arguments about stuff like that. Because I actually think that even though sure it allows you to disagree with an assumption that right wingers often make a big deal of, I also think that it might not be as rhetorically useful as a lot of people think it is, right? Like, so I know this is kind of pop MMT anyway, but like people say, like I see a lot of online leftists like getting really into MMT and saying like, oh, aha, see, you think that taxation funds social services, but since I understand modern monetary theory, I know that's not true. I know that that in fact, the government, like taxation, like the government taxes money into existence, and and actually taxation doesn't pay for it, and then if you listen to them talk for long enough, they'll start to say things like, well, you have like, well, okay, sure, but there are reasons to have like lots of taxation anyway. And one of the, not the only one, but one they'll often make a big deal of is like, well, it's a counter-inflation measure, right? That if you just, that if you're just spending all this money and you're not taxing, you get inflation. It's like, okay, but wait a second. Which one of these do you think is going to be a better pitch for most ordinary people? One, we don't actually need taxes except as this sort of wonky thing to like deal with inflation, but you should support it because, that's important. Or two, we need all of these taxes so we can pay for like healthcare and education and, all of these things that you care about. Like, I think it's going to be the second one, right? I think more people are going to respond more to that, right? And especially because in a certain way, the person who says the first thing and the person who says the second thing aren't even exactly disagreeing, right? They're kind of just like expressing the same thing in different ways. And it just seems to me like the second one is just going to be much more useful. And like, so yeah, I think that having, and I also don't think you need, like saying, look, yeah, I mean, you have, like, I don't think having like a debt is some, you know, giant deal anyway. But like, also I think saying this, like, okay, sure, like if you're that concerned about it, you know, like let's tax some rich people, and you know, and you know, and reduce it, you know, reduce it that way. But it's also, I think you can see that it's a stupid obsession without having to start from the premises that, rightly or wrongly, 99.9% of the people you're talking to are going to find super counterintuitive, right? Like if you say, yeah, I think that it's really important that we have all these social services, and I think that's more important than rich people getting to keep all their money, then I think you started with premises that most people can understand. I think if you start by saying, oh, you actually have to think about the relationship between all these concepts in exactly the opposite way from like what's intuitive to most people, then I just don't think that's going to be a very effective argument. So I think that, like, I understand why people think it's going to be super useful, but I'm pretty skeptical of that. And like generally on economics, like I guess my big hot take about economics is that I have the most respect for it when it acts like it's an empirical social science, and you have to like actually like see what happens in order to like make confident statements about trends. And like the more you're just kind of, we were talking about this in that debate breakdown we did on Thursday when I was like jokingly calling the alien versus predator debate on economics between the Chicago school guy and the Austrian guy. Like the, you know, like if you're, because like you can have, if you want to just have like, look, here are my like 10 premises about how economies work, like it's not hard to come up with 10 statements that sound pretty plausible. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds like it would be true, and then like spit out a whole bunch of shit from that. But like the problem is you can do that in too many different directions. And that's, I'm not saying all this to say that like you shouldn't do economic theory. Go ahead and do economic theory. I'm not even saying that your favorite economic theory is wrong. I'm just saying that like I feel most confident making assertions about economics when they're based on like data from a bunch of different countries, and not there's a TMBS callback anyway, and not based, and not like just sort of extrapolated from first principles. So that's, anyway, that's my bias about that, but you know, we can move on.
Yeah, well, should we close it out on a super chat?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so let's see. From Dan, where does the theory of existentialism differ from Marxism? I know the former is more continental and the latter is more positivist.
All right, thank you for the super chat, Dan. I think I would just say, so Sartre, who was referred to earlier and maligned as a Pashtanki, is somebody who spent actually a bit of his life worried about this exact question, about the relationship between these two things. You can read that book I mentioned earlier, Search for Method, to see what he has to say about it there. I think there's also like an anthology I remember of his stuff about this called just like Existentialism and Marxism. But I guess from my perspective, and since obviously, you know, like Sartre, who would be a much better go-to source than me on existentialism, thinks that's more complicated than this, probably is. But my inclination would be to say that these are just like theories about different subjects. So like when we talk about Marxism, what are we talking about, right? Like basically an analysis of how capitalist society works, and to a lesser extent other forms of class society, a theory of how historical change works, and like, you know, oftentimes we're also talking about like a normative political program. Like in practice, that's a lot of what people mean when they describe somebody as a Marxist, that they're committed to that political program. Okay, those, whatever you think about those three subjects, that just strikes me as a very different question from what like existentialism about, which is roughly, and I know different existentialist thinkers understand it a little bit differently. Sartre is actually a little unusual because he has like an explicit definition that he'll give, and like some of the other people we think of as existentialists don't do that. So maybe this doesn't like quite match up with, you know, what all of those guys mean, you know, I don't know, Heidegger, Jaspers, whoever, right? But like certainly at least Sartre, right, he says as existentialism is the view that existence precedes essence, whereas essentialism is, you know, which is kind of the dominant view in the history of philosophy, is the theory that essence precedes existence. So To say that essence precedes existence means that the meaning of life is something that might be in a religious version of it, like a function of the will of your creator, or maybe there's some quasi-secular version where you talk about, nature or, whatever, right? Like different things. Whereas existentialism is the view that the meaning of life, right, the point of life, the purpose of life is something that can only be a function of your free choices, right? That's what existence precedes essence means. And I guess, again, my instinct, and I don't know if this is me being too much of like a crass materialist or too much of a Rawlsian lib or both, but my instinct is just to say that like views about questions like that, what's the meaning of life, what's a good life for a person, stuff like that, are just very different questions from sort of historical and political questions. That like maybe the point of politics is to give people space to live whatever kind of lives they want to live, right? I mean, like I can go along with that, right? Like that is kind of my view, right? But like as far as like what makes a life good or meaningful or anything like that just seems like a non-political question to me. That I think that's so I think that you could be like, you could think that you could be like a Rick Warren purpose-driven life guy, and as long as you think that as long as like you can extrapolate from that some like basic values that you can translate into support for like an egalitarian socialist political program, that we're 5 by 5 as far as that goes, or or you could be like a really moody existentialist and same thing, we're still good, right? I think that's just I think it's just a separate question. I think that I've actually been just before we started streaming. Well, actually, just before we started streaming, like the pizza came and we were like eating and watching ESPN. But like just before that, I was working on a writing project that I promised a long time ago and I never did. And I'm like finally trying to, to get through it, which is a introduction to Matt McManus's book on cosmopolitan socialism, and which is basically an attempt at a sort of book-length explication of what Michael Brooks meant by that. That he talks about a little bit in the last chapter of his book Against the Web. And, basically I think that like, for whatever reason, I don't know, I wrote 2 articles about Michael, like right after he died. And like, for some reason I was able to do that. But like, a year and a half later, this is like, pulling teeth to get myself to think or write about that. But I don't know if it's just like much more real now or like what it is. But in any case, I think that what he was, I think a lot of Michael's point about cosmopolitan socialism, as I understood it, at least some of it, was about exactly what I just said, right? Like that's not the issue he was thinking about existentialism and all that stuff, right? But like the issue he was thinking about was like, culture and religion and all of that stuff, right? But that like you should, you shouldn't be an essentialist about cultural traditions. You should think that like every sort of, big religious or cultural tradition is going to be multifaceted enough that you can find, that there are going to be people within it who find their way to exactly the kind of values that you like. And justify them using the language of that tradition. There are going to be people within it who find their ways to like, regressive and hierarchical and horrible values you hate, and express those within the language of the tradition, and points in between. And none of them are right? Like none of them are wrong, right? It's like there is no magical essence of, whatever, Islam, Chinese culture, the West, whatever, right? Like all of these things are incredibly complicated traditions that like, and none of them have like the single magical essential, thing that makes it like the right take on it. And so you should just, like, to go back to Rawls, because he, I think the sort of overlapping consensus of a bunch of these, right, could get you the sort of value system that would be the normative component of a kind of liberatory socialist political program. And as far as politics goes, you can, I think to like really, really simplify it, right? I mean, it's like if you, if you don't want to impose your beliefs about how people should live on me, then I don't care that you have those beliefs. We can, like, after the revolution, we can spend all of our time at the coffee shop having, fun philosophical argument about it. But but for right now, at least insofar as I'm interested in politics, I'm just not interested in that.
Well, that was a good last question, maybe. I was kind of rudely interrupted from reading this really fascinating new book when we started, for those of you that
I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah, Andy and I were like, we were trying to get in our reading, and Ben forced us to do this, so we're probably going to get back to that. But Ben, do you have anything to mention proof this was all my idea. Wasn't Ben didn't private chat me and say, hey, do one more plug for the book, but yeah, dinner time here as well. But yeah, what's upcoming that we want folks to know about?
Okay, on Thursday, we're doing the second half of the Alien versus Predator debate about economics between Walter Block and David Friedman. That would be Milton Friedman's son. So these are both guys I've debated. So it's kind of fascinating to see them go at it with each other. And the first one was a lot of fun, just because like it's both like,
Well, Walter Block is just fun.
Yeah, yes. And there's also this whole part of it that's like unintentional. There's also a whole chunk of it that's just like unintentional comedy gold, because like these are both like very old men who don't quite understand how Zoom works. So there's some good like so there's some good improvisational unintentional comedy about that, but it's also anyway it's actually very interesting, maybe more interesting than it sounds. On Monday, we are having another regular episode during the main show. The main guest is going to be Naomi Caravani, who is and yes, for any for any very confused MSNBC liberals who are for some reason watching this, that does mean that I'm platforming somebody from RT at the very moment when Russia and the United States are facing off. But Naomi is a comedian and political commentator, and she's very funny, and
yes.
And she's good. It's gonna be a really good conversation. I'm really looking forward to that. And in the post game, our extended podcasting universe, friend Conan Neutron is going to be hanging out in the post game next week. He wants to talk about Aaron Sorkin. He has a take, so that should be fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The only thing I'm gonna promote is all the same stuff. It's the only thing I'm doing. So all Ben stuff I promote as well. Andy, anything to promote?
Let's see here. I know this week is kind of a off week for me, for the most part. Because I'm not on any streams besides this one, as far as I know, unless somebody surprises me. But check out this great cover of this book. And also, I do know just things in the works in the future. One of my oldest friends, Gabriel Horn, and I will be having a talk in the future about a friend of his who unfortunately is in stage 4 cancer. Like, it's spread all throughout his body. He's not left us yet, but he's not long for this world. But he is a longtime Texas director, producer, creative guy who's really helped a lot of movies get off the ground, Tom Huckabee. I don't know which Tom Huckabee movie we're going to discuss. It might be the one that Gabe starred in, Carried Away. But Tom Huckabee also discovered Bill Paxton. So if you're a Bill Paxton fan, go check out Tom Huckabee's very first directorial movie, Taking of Tiger Mountain, 1970 something film. It's a weird like feminist thing set in World War III, where the patriarchy takes over Europe. I've not seen it, so I can't really speak to it. But it's Bill Paxton's first starring role. So worth checking out for movie buffs out there.
Yeah, fair enough.
Ben put that on the screen. If you can't tell, I didn't put that on the screen and then just start cackling. But yeah, that's great. We did go Rawls deep tonight. Thank you, Danny. All right.
Yeah. So lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff coming up. I should also say that on the more theoretical side, fan favorite Lillian Securtia is going to be back on the show in a couple weeks on the 21st. So really looking forward to that. I think that's. I think that is probably it for tonight. After the discussion last Monday, I really want to. I've had this thought before, but if anybody out there in the audience has some idea of how to get in touch with William Lane Craig, I think that would be a fun debate sometime. So I'm just going to put that out into the universe and see what happens. But yeah, otherwise. Many good things coming up. Going to have Nathan Robinson back on soon, probably to do a debate breakdown about the time Christopher Hitchens went on firing line with William F. Buckley. So that should be good stuff. Thank you everybody for watching. We of course went way longer than I intended to because there were so many good questions. But I believe I'm keeping Jake away from his pizza, and I should
book.
And more importantly, book. But man does not live on pizza alone. But I should probably get back to work. What I was doing just before this. But thanks, guys. This is a lot of fun. See everybody next week. Left is best.